die. In 5 billion years, which is to say fucking soon, ladies and gentlemen. It's on us, and if it hasn't happened before then, our sun goes into a red giant, then a red dwarf. We become a crisp. That'll be nothingness programmed instead of somethingness. Some design, huh?
God almighty, if the Andromeda Galaxy doesn't finish me off and Christopher Hitchens doesn't, how many other threats will?
One of the many things I don't like about Christianity is that it tells me to love my enemies. I don't do that, and I don't want you doing it for me either. Go love your own enemies. Don't be loving mine. I'll get on with the business of destroying, isolating, and combating the enemies of civilization. That is going to take some time, making the case, but I think I can probably make a fist of it. I prefer to argue, and I do in my book, that the belief in a supreme being or creator is actually a pernicious belief that does great moral and intellectual damage to our poorly evolved primate species. And I'm hoping that we will, in the course of this evening, get to the point about the ill effect of religion, but I'm not going to duck the obligation imposed upon me by the motion before us, which is to give the reasons why we're so lucky as to be furnished with so little evidence for such a horrible proposition. And falsity, after all, is a subdivision of perniciousness. Religion, however, does stand, having started in that pejorative manner, does in a way stand to our credit. We are, after all, imperfectly evolved primate mammals though we are, and aware of our kinship with other such creatures. We do have the gift of pattern seeking in our minds, and we will pursue this gift, often at our own expense, but at great hazard and often with great ingenuity. That has a plus side and a minus side. It very often means, you'll have observed it in your own lives and those of others, that we prefer a junk explanation to no explanation at all, or a conspiracy theory to no theory. And religion takes its place in our evolution in this precise manner. It's the first and worst explanation we came up with. It's the best we could do when we didn't know we lived on a cooling planet with big fissures in its crust. When we didn't know there were microorganisms that had power over us, we didn't have dominion over them. To the contrary. When we didn't know we lived on a spherical planet, we didn't know we revolved around other spherical bodies, everything was terrifying, new, mysterious, and often lethal. It was our first attempt at philosophy in that way, first attempt at cosmology, first attempt at geography, biology, all the rest of it. A hopeless attempt belonging to the bawling, fearful, ignorant childhood of our species, but very necessary. And it possesses still the advantage of having come first. The terrible advantage over the mind and over learning that it possesses is its originality. And the history of human emancipation is the struggle to get away from this terrifying, foolish, ignorant first try. And I can see we have still some distance to travel, but we have made a start. Now, you can argue it because it's still here. We know a little bit, of course. We don't now think that the Aztecs were really on to something. We don't think that all faith-based is better than none. We don't think you need to wrench a living heart out of a chest cavity to make the sun come up every day. We've been through the list of gods. It's in my edited collection, The Portable Atheist. Mencken actually drew up a list of very nearly 10,000 gods that used to be worshipped and aren't anymore. As my friend Richard Dawkins says, everyone's an atheist. Nobody believes in the sun god Ra anymore. Nobody believes in Huitzilopochtli anymore. Nobody believes in Juno and Venus anymore. You're all atheists as far as that's concerned. And you look with pity on those who support or ever did such cults. All we say is, make it consistent. Just go one god more, and you're nearly there. Peter de Vries puts it. Peter de Vries, who, poor guy, brilliant novelist and great essayist, who, poor guy, was brought up Dutch Reformed in Illinois, says in his wonderful discussion of religion, A Slouching Towards Kalamazoo, it's called, I recommend it, people used to be polytheistic. They believed in many, many, many gods. Then, for some reason, they decided to narrow it down to one. They're getting nearer to the true figure all the time. This is the struggle I want to invite you to join, ladies and gentlemen. The easiest way, I think, to clear your mind of such remaining illusions as you may possess or labor under is the following. The great words of Laplace, the first person to develop what's called the orrery, a model of how the cosmos and the universe would look as if it was viewed for the first time from the outside, the circulation of the heavenly bodies and the planets. And he showed it to the Emperor Napoleon, who wanted to know how this great genius, the only rival to Newton in his time, Laplace, had managed this, and he demonstrated to the Emperor how it worked. And the Emperor said, "But there's no God in this machine." And Laplace said, "Well, it works very well, Your Highness, without that assumption." Not just science, but our own other reflections have told us that there is nothing remaining to be explained that could only be explained by the existence of a supreme being, creator, or first cause. The universe, and our lives too, all operate exactly as you would expect them to if there was no such thing. Why does the delusion persist? Well, we might get to that. I think it has a lot to do with wish thinking, and not wishing only for desirable things either, such as the survival of death, but also wishing for things that are less desirable, such as the triumph of ourselves over others, with God on our side, having made a special covenant with, say, just one tribe in Bronze Age Palestine. The most reactionary idea probably ever invented by the religious. But you'll see analogies of it everywhere God is discussed. Or the need for a terrifying supreme dictator. Nietzsche is said to have said that God is dead. Freud is said to have said that God is dad. Others clearly believe that we would be better off. In fact, we wouldn't have any ideas of our own if we couldn't submit to a celestial totalitarianism, a final, unanswerable authority in the heavens. This is wish thinking, but of a very unpleasant kind. It shows again how poorly we have evolved ourselves from the fearful primate and mammalian species that first crawled out of the mire. Now, there are global and cosmic versions of this. I have time, I think, for a few minutes remaining, to deal with them both. Start with the cosmic. Why not? There are I think it's 4,000 billion observable galaxies now. Anyone who claims to know a lot about all of these has sources of information denied to me, but we know a little bit about them and a lot more than we used to do. And Edwin Hubble noticed rather famously a few decades ago that they're all moving away from each other rather rapidly. It's what they call the red light problem or observation. Very rapidly indeed, in fact. Now, this has very important implications because it was thought until 9 years ago that because of gravitational factors, that rate of expansion would surely by now be slowing. They'd still be expanding, moving away from each other fast, but less fast all the time. No, the rate is going up. The speed is increasing. Lawrence Krauss has a wonderful piece in the upcoming Scientific American on this absolutely crucial point. It means that within measurable time, there will be no signs left in the observable universe that the Big Bang ever occurred at all. Everything will have disappeared out of sight. There will be no markers, nothing to take observations from. I mention this because it's often said that how can something come out of nothing? It's the clever question every religious demagogue and businessman always begins by asking you. Well, we know we've got a bit of something in this universe, and we know nothingness is coming. So, some design, huh? Nothingness is not just innate, programmed, it's the next big thing. And we at least had some somethingness. As if to make assurance doubly sure, the Andromeda Galaxy is headed directly in collision course with our own. Measurably, it's already filling. The sky can be seen with the naked eye. In 5 billion years, which is to say fucking soon, ladies and gentlemen, it's on us. And if it hasn't happened before then, our sun goes into a red giant, then a red dwarf. We become a crisp. That'll be nothingness programmed instead of somethingness. Some design, huh?
Religion was humanity's first attempt to explain fear, death, disease, storms, stars, and suffering. But being first does not make it true. Science replaced those old answers with evidence. Germs explain disease. Astronomy explains planets and galaxies. Evolution explains life without needing a designer. Even the Bible admits humans are made from dust and return to dust in Ecclesiastes 3:20. That sounds far closer to biology than heaven. The brutal truth is simple. Religion gave ancient people comfort, but comfort is not proof.
Well, let's move then, while you ponder that, to the tiny suburb in which we actually do know we live, this little corner, just our solar system. Every other rock in our solar system is completely inhospitable to life, either too hot or too cold, as is most of our planet, which, as we know, have good cause to know, is on a knife edge of climatic survival as we speak. We could become extinct at any moment. In fact, when we still lived on the savanna of Africa, the environment to which we were adapted and have fled, but where we still betray the scars of our lowly origin by the coat of fur we grow in the womb and then shed, by the appendix, by our terrible dentition, and by many other things. Our adrenal glands are too big, our prefrontal lobes are too small. We're not the finest primates that could have evolved. It's estimated by the people who've done the DNA work on this that we were down as a species to less than a few thousand because of climatic events and other nightmares and catastrophes before the decision was made to abandon the savanna and seek cooler territory. We could very easily have joined the 99.9% of every other species that has ever been in existence on this tiny planet and become extinct. That close. What are we flattering ourselves about? What is so great about our anthropic principle that we should attribute this to a design or a designer? Some design, huh? And some designer too. Who but a serf wants it to be true? Who but someone who doesn't like to do their own thinking wants or needs this to be true in the face of all, not just some, but all of the available evidence before us? I've put it like this. It's the only hypothesis of my own that I've ever come up with. It's a version of, on this point anyway, it's a version of Joseph Schumpeter's hypothesis about creative destruction as the energy of capitalism. In order to believe in, not in a deistic God, in other words, a creator, a first cause, an imponderable starter, which of course only leads you to an infinite regression, because how could there be a starter who wasn't himself started or herself begun? Who created the God? Who made the creator? Who invented the inventor? Who designed the designer? Any fool can see the fallacy peering right over the shoulder of this hypothesis. But suppose that's not just a theistic question, but, a deistic question, but a theistic one. A God who answers prayers, a God who intervenes, a God who didn't just start this, but cares how it winds up, who cares what you do to your private parts or to those of your children and insists on their being mutilated, who knows what you should eat and what day of the week, who knows with which gender you may or may not recreate yourself or be recreational with, and so forth. The deist has all their work still ahead of them to prove that there is such a being. Here's what you'd have to believe to be a theist. I've already shown the absurdity of deism, I hope. To be a theist, you'd have to believe this. How long do you think, ladies and gentlemen, I have 3 minutes, shan't, I hope, need them all. How long do you think the human species, as a distinct Homo sapiens, has been on the planet? Anyone want to shout a guess? Okay. Well, Richard Dawkins thinks 250,000 years, 250,000. That's considered to be on the high end. Francis Collins, who's become a friend of mine, a very, very devout Christian, who, as you will know, sequenced the Human Genome Project and did the final report on the full-out discovery of that unravelment which showed us our kinship with other creatures and indeed with other non-creatures, other forms of vegetation and junk that's in our, undoubtedly proves us to be part of the creational soup. He thinks minimum 100,000. He's not quite sure if it's 250,000. All right, I only need 100,000. 100,000 years since we dared to became separate from the Cro-Magnons and the Neanderthals as our own species, Homo sapiens. Here's what you have to believe to be a theist. For 100,000 years, humanity is born. Perhaps 25% of it dies in childbirth or very shortly afterwards. Life expectancy, 25 for a very long time. Infant mortality, extraordinary, after childbirth deaths, Killed by microorganisms we didn't know existed, by earthquakes that we thought were portents, by storms that we didn't know came from our climate system, by other events that arise from being born onto a cooling planet with deep cracks in its crust, faults in its crust. Then man-made things, turf wars, fights over women, fights over territory, over food, and so on. Very, very slow, gradual, exponential upward progress, we might like to think. Pretty slow, but at least we can claim, out of our own self-respect, man-made. And for the first 96,000 years of this experience, heaven watches with folded arms. Us go through this with indifference, without pity. And then around 4,000 years ago decides, gee, it's time to intervene. And the best way of doing that would probably be in Bronze Age Middle East, making appearances to stupefied illiterate peasants, which could later be passed on. The news would get to China after about 1,000 years of that.
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
That's what you have to believe. Aren't you glad you can't be made to believe that? Aren't you glad there's no theocracy anymore within range of you that can make you believe that? Do you know what it's like living in countries where you can be made to believe it? Do you know what the penalties are for not believing it? They're just exactly congruent with the stupidity of the belief itself. We would be better off, ladies and gentlemen, if we grew out of it. We would be better off if we'd grown out of it a long time ago. I've only had 15 minutes to show its falsity. The rest of the evening, I hope, can be devoted to its wickedness. But the falsity is part of the wickedness too, and thanks for hearing me out. Thank you.
The design argument collapses when you look at the real world. Humans are not the center of a perfect plan. We are fragile animals on one small planet, in one solar system, surrounded by places that would kill us instantly. Our species evolved in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago, shaped by climate, hunger, disease, and survival pressure. That is not divine craftsmanship. That is biology under stress. If a loving God waded through hundreds of thousands of years of infant death, disease, extinction, and fear before revealing truth to one ancient region, that looks less like wisdom and more like a man-made story trying to explain a cruel world.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. After hearing that speech, I am so depressed. God almighty, if the Andromeda Galaxy doesn't finish me off and Christopher Hitchens doesn't, how many other threats will? Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great, made a lot of money for him, even though atheism is a non-profit organization. I hope someone caught that. And I am a fan of Christopher Hitchens' work. This is our second debate. But my friends, I am profoundly disappointed with this work. It is his weakest book yet. In it, he is guilty of the same colossal closed-mindedness of which he accuses religion. The book is filled with logical inconsistencies, factual inaccuracies, and blatant untruths. In a nutshell, Christopher Hitchens is a secular fundamentalist fanatic. He falls prey to mankind's most base instinct, namely hatred. He hates religion. He even hates God, which is difficult since he doesn't exist. And most importantly, he hates hope. Like Richard Dawkins, who I have debated at Oxford University on several occasions, Hitchens is a scientific reductionist, reducing humans to naught but vapid animals, semi-literate primates, half-thinking apes. His book lacks joy, it lacks humor. It is a profoundly depressing tome about the decrepit nature of human existence. The book that I've launched tonight, The Broken American Male, available at fine bookstores everywhere, is the direct result of this shattered vision. Human beings are bereft of any real cosmic purpose. All they can do in life is revert to hunter-gatherers, gathering money during the day so they can hunt women at night. In so doing, they fulfill their genetic role of being naught but sperm donors. Jack Nicholson expressed it best in that great Bible of American literature, People magazine of December 21st, 2007. He said, when it comes to love, we men have more in common with a male dog than we do with a woman. Oh, this may be male chauvinism, but it's science, baby. Hence, my friends, Christopher Hitchens does not believe in any kind of heroes or human greatness. Of Martin Luther King in his book, he writes, quote, He was a mammal like the rest of us, probably plagiarized his doctoral dissertation, had a notorious fondness for booze and for women, a good deal younger than his wife. Mahatma Gandhi is someone who would have caused millions of Indians to starve, and had we listened to him, we'd be worshiping cows. The Dalai Lama makes a claim that he's a hereditary king, and dissenting sects within his faith are persecuted. Of course, Mother Teresa bears the greatest brunt of his fury. He says of Mother Teresa, she was a friend of poverty, a fanatic, a fundamentalist, and a fraud. But tell us what you really think, Christopher. My friends, religion has a vastly different vision and a vastly different take. Yes, a man is a creature like any other, but he is born with a spiritual capacity to transcend instinct and to choose goodness, to rise above his animal nature and become godly. What to Hitchens is a failure, that humans occasionally succumb to their nature, is to us glory. When they choose inspiration over indulgence, they triumph over instinct. Hitchens is right. Human beings, in terms of DNA, are 98% exactly like primates. But in that 2%. In that 2% lies human consciousness, and therefore human conscience. Human transcendence, and therefore human choice. Human soulfulness, and therefore the indomitable human spirit. A watermelon is also 98% water, just like a jellyfish is, but they are hardly alike. I'm not eating any jellyfish anytime soon, and I cannot accept that we are nothing but thinking primates. To give you an idea of the degree of blindness that you're hearing tonight, I want to just choose a few examples of this loathing of religion that has made a great scholar become positively ignorant. He says that the Torah lacks compassion on page 99. Quote, the pitiless teachings of Moses, who never mentions human solidarity and compassion at all. Even school children know Leviticus 19:18 with the greatest statement of human solidarity in the history of the world. You must love your fellow man as yourself. He attacked circumcision a few moments ago. In his book, he calls it religious barbarism. Quote, it is a mutilation of a powerless infant with the aim of ruining its future sex life. As an authority on the subject, no, not because I have 8 children, but I wrote Kosher Sex. What a shame that Christopher Hitchens doesn't read the New York Times. He would have discovered, I'm sure you remember, it was a front-page story, December 14th, 2006. Quote, circumcision appears to reduce a man's risk of contracting AIDS by 50%. In fact, the 2 largest AIDS charities on earth, quote, are considering paying for circumcisions in high-risk countries. So these great charities are going to inflict this barbarism in order to save people's lives. But this is the really fun part. Because he sees religion as primitive, he says that the most annoying and the most unfortunate of all Jewish holidays is Hanukkah. He calls it an absolutely tragic day in human history. Now this is funny. Parenthetically, he says, I love this. The Jews borrowed shamelessly from Christians in the pathetic hope of celebration that coincides with Christmas. Surely he knows that the Maccabees lived 300 years before the birth of Jesus, but we'll ignore that for a moment. What I love, what he says about Hanukkah is, it's a primitive holiday where Jews reject science and Hellenism for their primitive beliefs. Listen to this. The Jews felt the pull exerted by Athens. They chose the superstition mandated by the Torah. Let's see what enlightenment the Jews fought against during Hanukkah. The great Oxford historian, who was a friend of mine, Martin Goodman, says that Antiochus IV, the villain of Hanukkah, was, quote, called a barbarian and madman by his own people. If you look up in Wikipedia, just Google it. Antiochus IV put Jerusalem's inhabitants to death in the most cruel way. He insisted on slaughtering a pig in the temple, and when the Jews refused to eat it, quote, he cut off their hands and feet, burned them on the altar, scalped them, and this is the Greek Enlightenment that the Jews should not have resisted. Christopher, you supported the invasion of Iraq because you said that Saddam Hussein was a tyrant who didn't deserve to slaughter his people. But you decried the Jews for standing up against their own brutal oppressors. But my friends, it's really the values of those Greco-Romans that the Jews rejected. These great enlightened values that Christopher Hitchens decries us religious Neanderthals for rejecting. Those great values like the people of Sparta, the Greeks, who used to inspect newborn infants, and if they were found to be weakly, they would cast them from Mount Tegaros. The Romans, of course, would inspect grown adults, and if they were mentally infirm, they would be thrown from the Tarpeian Rock.
The religious defense here tries to change the subject. Instead of proving God exists, it attacks atheism as cold, hateful, and hopeless. That is not evidence. Human value does not require a soul claim. We can explain morality through empathy, cooperation, child rearing, and social survival. Even the circumcision argument proves the problem. A medical benefit in certain adult HIV risk settings does not automatically justify making a permanent religious cut on infants. Science asks for consent, evidence, and context. Religion demands obedience first, then searches for excuses later.
Don't think I'm being unfair in citing ancient Hellenistic values against religious ones. No less an authority than Francis Crick, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist who mapped the DNA molecule, suggested that birth in our time come 2 days after parturition, so that a baby could be examined for defects, and if found to be sufficiently deleterious, could be removed with impunity since it has not yet been born. He also suggested that we declare death at the age of 80 when people are no longer useful. Professor Bentley Glass said good and evil should have a scientific evolutionary connotation. They should be divorced from their traditional connotation, and they should connote what is good and bad for the species, so a child with Tay-Sachs would be eliminated. In fact, Hitchens himself, something that sounds quite frightening, page 221 of his book. A very large number of pregnancies are aborted, he's speaking about miscarriages, because of malformation. Sad though this is, it is probably less miserable an outcome than the vast number of deformed or idiot children who would otherwise have been born, or whose brief lives would have been a torment to themselves and others. I therefore challenge my august colleague to explain why then should we not euthanize Down syndrome children? They are a burden to their parents. They can contribute nothing to the society. They are the idiot children of whom even our own Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said, famously, 3 generations of idiots are enough. When so many states here in America used to sterilize the mentally handicapped, what was wrong with that? In fact, let me give you 2 quotations, and I would like you to tell me who you think they are from. Number 1, in nature there is no pity for the lesser creatures when they are destroyed so that the fittest may survive. Going against nature brings ruin to man. It is only Jewish impudence to demand that we overcome nature. Listen to this very similar quote. The more civilized so-called Caucasian races, the white people, have beaten the Turkish hollow in the struggle for existence. The white people decimated the dark people. Looking at the world at no very distant date, what an endless number of the lower races will have been eliminated by the higher civilized races. First quotation was from a politician. His name was Adolf Hitler. The second quotation was from a scientist. His name was Charles Darwin. Evolutionary theory, as I intend to demonstrate in the second part of this debate, is based on the survival of the fittest. It is not good for the species or for the human race to sustain people who are weaker. Charity is a religious concept, pure and simple. That's why you heard such a depressing presentation. There is no hope. Life has no amber. There is nothing that glows. In fact, Sir Arthur Keith, the greatest British evolutionist of the World War II period, said, quote, to see evolutionary measures being applied vigorously, one must turn to Germany of 1942. We see Hitler devoutly convinced that evolution produces the only real basis for a national policy. The means he adopted was organized slaughter to secure the German race. They needed more space, they needed more food. You kill the weaker ones to protect the stronger ones. The German Führer, as I have consistently maintained, wrote Sir Arthur Keith, is an evolutionist and seeks to make the practice of Germany conform to evolution. And here you have why Christopher Hitchens attacks the 10 Commandments. You know, this is amazing because he says about the 10 Commandments, listen to this. However little one thinks of the Jewish tradition, it is surely insulting to the people of Moses to imagine they had come this far under the impression that murder, adultery, theft, and perjury were permissible. But he misses the entire point. God didn't bring the Jews to the foot of Mount Sinai to tell them not to kill. God brought them to the foot of Mount Sinai so they would understand that do not murder is God's law. Not now, not ever. There is no excuse. This is why genocide is perpetrated by nations who have man-made laws. There were laws against murder in Ottoman Turkey. There were laws against murder in Nazi Germany. There were laws against murder in Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge. But they were human laws and subject to human tampering. That's why the Ten Commandments have preserved the morality of a nation who, even when they were turned into soap and lampshades during the Holocaust, never blew up a German school bus because we lived by that edict, do not murder. My friends, open your eyes and see what I see. As Rabbi Akiva famously said, just as the garment testifies to the weaver, the door to the carpenter, the house to the builder, so the entire world testifies to God the Creator. In this book, which I published as a result of my debates with Richard Dawkins at Oxford, this is 13 years old. I have about another minute. And surely science has found far greater wonders since then. If the Earth were closer or further from the sun, by just a little bit, the heat or cold it generated would make life impossible. If the Earth were not tilted on its axis 23 degrees, huge mountains of ice would pile up from the water vapor of the oceans. The Earth revolves at a speed of 1,000 miles per hour. If it were to revolve at just 100 miles per hour, night and day would increase 10 times in duration. Plants would be scorched in the day, seedlings would be frozen at night. If the moon were a bit closer to the Earth, the tide would flood all lands, including the high mountains. If the oceans were deeper, carbon dioxide and oxygen would be absorbed and no plants could exist. If the atmosphere were thinner, millions of meteors which are burned up in the air would fall to the Earth and cause limitless devastation. While most substances contract when they freeze, water miraculously expands by 1/11 of its volume. This makes ice float on the top and it allows the fish to survive. Till today, the cause of this expansion perplexes scientists. 2 weeks ago, the New York Times Magazine wrote, January 13, 2008, the moral sense is an innate part of being human. We are born with innate morality. It is not acquired. A list of human universals, collected by anthropologist Donald Brown, includes moral concepts, including a distinction between right and wrong, empathy, fairness, admiration, generosity, shame. These are all character traits which are antithetical to evolution, which are about ensuring that your genes survive. Finally, my friends, listen to this. The little embryo, that little baby that will have to grow up in a world of hope, hearing so much about how we're the only forlorn rock without any life surrounding us. It's born with 10,000 taste buds in its mouth. Some 12 trillion nerve endings will form in the baby's nose to help it detect fragrances of odors in the air. More than 100,000 nerve cells will be devoted to reacting to Beethoven's symphony. The piano has 240 strings, but a baby's ear will have 240,000 hearing units. Those 10,000 spokes, by the way, the million nerve endings of the optical nerves of the eye, which connects with the brain and somehow grows from 2 different directions and meets 1 million nerve endings, is so vast that if were it mapped, the entire world's telephone cable system would be only a small fraction of it, a small fraction. It has no designer at all, according to Christopher Hitchens. Since I have to end, let me just tell you, of course, science says that this phenomenal complexity came about through genetic mutation and natural selection. When I come back, we'll explore whether that is the case, or whether such vast complexity could never have come about spontaneously, and whether those who believe it did are guilty of cognitive dissonance, afraid of a truth so great that they're forced to deny it.
This argument tries to blame evolution for cruelty, but that is a cheap trick. Evolution describes how life changes over time. It does not say genocide is good. That mistake is called turning what happens in nature into what humans should do. By that logic, disease, starvation, and parasites would also become moral examples. Ridiculous. Science explains nature. It does not worship it. Religion, meanwhile, claims do not murder came from God, then has to explain why the Bible includes commands to slaughter entire groups, including children, in passages like Deuteronomy 20 and 1 Samuel 15. The moral problem is not atheism. The problem is pretending ancient violence becomes holy when God's name is attached to it.
Well, as some of you already know, never buy crackling from a moil. The rabbi is in the uplift business. C'est son métier, as was once said. And he thinks it's a point against me that some of the conclusions I draw are not such as to make one happy. I'm unused to arguing in this style. I will simply point out that that's what I'm expected to do in a debate that's organized along these lines against someone who thinks that evolution by means of natural selection, which is a hypothesis, a theory, which, if tested, always works, which allows us to sequence the DNA of the influenza virus so that the next time it comes, unlike 1919, it won't kill us all, because we know of its kinship with ourselves, as we know we ourselves evolved from sightless bacteria, because we have the computer models by which the eye was evolved in 40 different ways, at least, among different species. So there's nothing left to argue with except with people like Rabbi Boteach and Governor Huckabee of Arkansas, who, head as he is of what I would describe as a non-philo-Semitic Christian organization, believes that Adam and Eve were real and indeed quite recent people. In my experience, there's nothing to be done with points like this except to underline them. Governor Huckabee, in fact, doesn't even know what he doesn't believe when putting up his chubby hand to say he was among those in the room who didn't believe in the theory of evolution. He said, "No, I don't believe that I'm descended from a monkey." Well, as you know, the theory of evolution does not demand that you believe anything remotely like that. It points to a common ancestry between other primates and ourselves. If we were descended from monkeys, we'd probably look quite a lot like Governor Huckabee. Now, I just have spent a second on the taunt about being a fundamentalist. To be a fundamentalist is to insist that something can be advanced on faith alone and without evidence. I will submit myself to your fair-mindedness, ladies and gentlemen, and ask if anything I said to you, or am saying now, requires that of you, that you take an act of faith or leap of faith as if it were an ethical thing to do, or that you take one at all for anything I say. Of course I don't. There's nothing in common between me and any other faith-based person of any kind. It's one of the last-ditch arguments that our foes, the foes of science and science education and the theory of evolution by natural selection as the explanation for our presence here, have had to come up with in their desperation. Hatred, yes, I plead guilty to that. One of the many things I don't like about Christianity is that it tells me to love my enemies. I don't do that, and I don't want you doing it for me either. Go love your own enemies. Don't be loving mine. I'll get on with the business of destroying, isolating, and combating the enemies of civilization. I don't need any... and I don't need any sickly advice from Nazareth, from the man who, after all the Old Testament horrors that we know about, none of them included the punishment of hell. There's no hell in the Old Testament. It's to the credit of the Jewish people, actually. When God and Moses have done with enjoining genocide on you, which, by the way, they do, according to those books. I don't know which books the rabbi's been reading, but he might want to tell you what happened to the Amalekites. Where are the Midianites? Happened to all these people. We know what we were told to do to them. So glad to think that those books are fictional, because if they were true, we would all be bespattered with the blood of others to please a hideous authority. But no punishment once he's done with you, once the earth is closed over you, that's it. There's no torture of the dead. Not till gentle Jesus, meek and mild. Do you get that? My same point about the overrated figures of Dr. King and Mahatma Gandhi. It's a very bad thing, it seems to me, that especially in white liberal society, the plaster saint of Martin Luther King has become iconographic. It's led to two bad consequences that I can think of. One, the great black secularists and socialists and trade union leaders, some of whom spoke at this very podium, Bayard Rustin, A. Philip Randolph and the others, the people who actually organized the March on Washington, with their white friends, secular friends like Victor Reuther of the United Automobile Workers, the people who actually put this great movement of liberation onto the streets, are airbrushed from history. White people are given deliberately the impression, well, black folks sure like their preachers and their pulpit men. And as a result, anyone who can claim to be a preacher, a fraud, a demagogue, a crook, like Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson, is automatically awarded the right to represent black America. This is not progress. Very well? I hope you understand me. It's not Dr. King's fault. That is not Dr. King's fault, but, as I say in my book, but it is the fault of those who make a cult out of him and who dare to say that without religious permission, we wouldn't know how to demand equal rights for our African-American brothers and sisters. Well, excuse me, we don't need religious permission for that, and the case for it had been made by the secular left long before Dr. King started preaching, and that's precisely why he was always attacked in his lifetime for having communist and socialist and Marxist friends, which he did, who had done most of the spade work. So let's again be very clear what we're talking about. I'm sorry, I do not believe the Dalai Lama's claim either to be a hereditary king or a hereditary god, and I think anyone who does believe it is a fool. And there hasn't been even the pretense of an election in the Tibetan exile community that he's now been leading for more than almost half a century in Dharamsala in India. It is still run as an absolute despotism. People who like that sort of thing like that sort of thing. More to the purpose, and you'll let me know, Mr. Chairman, when I'm coming to the... I have rather a crazy salad of slanders to respond to, and I don't want to miss any of them out. If you want to saw off the end of your penis, you're welcome. You're not to do it to a child who hasn't asked for it. Same with the genitals of a little girl. If she thinks later on she'd be better off without them, let her take, or have taken to her, a sharp instrument. If it proves that it's good for AIDS, which it might well be, I've heard it's been said that it's good for cervical cancer, let it be decided by the grown-up. It is not right, it is not moral, it is in fact wicked to submit children to mutilation of their genitalia or to anyone without their consent. Do you understand that that this elementary point only needs to be made because of wickedness enjoined by religion? The rabbi here is a fairly humane guy. He wouldn't, if he didn't think God was involved, ever consider mutilating the genitals of a child. But because it's a covenant with God, anything can be done. Now, don't you see? You laugh, but you should be crying. I said crying. Okay, suit yourself. Now, I'm not here to defend Zeus or Juno or Aphrodite. I listed them in the list of barbaric and forgotten gods. The Jews who celebrate Hanukkah, which, by the way, I think you will have to agree, only became promoted in the United States among Jews. It's a relatively minor holiday because of its nearness to Christmas Day. The Jews who particularly care about that holiday are not arguing against the worship of Zeus. They're arguing against, as the rabbi perfectly well knows, the idea of the Epikuros, what in Orthodox Judaism is known as the heretic, the unbeliever, the Epicurus, the follower of Epicurus. Epicurus and Lucretius were the secular Hellenists, the ones who discovered that the world was made of atoms, and that the gods, if they exist, do not concern themselves with human affairs, because, among other things, they avoid unnecessary pain. Now, there's a discovery that's worth having, and the Jews want you to turn away, the Orthodox Jews want you to turn away from the unbelievable scholarship and originality and humanism of Epicurus and Lucretius to look at a candle. Hey, look, goggle at this. It burned an extra day or two, or is it 8? This is what retards human intelligence and human civilization. Now, of course you may, I'll close on this because I don't want to trespass on your time or the rabbis. Of course you can be an atheist, and you can be a eugenicist, you can be a fascist, you can be a Stalinist, you can be a nihilist, you can be a sadist. Atheism, unbelief, the repudiation of the supernatural is not a necessary, is not a sufficient condition, not a sufficient condition for wisdom or for enlightenment, but it is, and I say it joylessly, humorlessly, gloomily, pessimistically, it is a necessary one. Thanks.
Here is where religion shows its real danger. It takes an adult's belief and forces it onto a child's body, mind, and future before that child can question anything. That is not morality. That is control. If a practice is truly good, it should survive consent, evidence, and adult choice. Christianity also teaches love your enemies in Matthew 5:44, but the same tradition built centuries of fear around hell, guilt, obedience, and punishment. A system that needs fear to protect belief is already weak. Truth does not need threats. Truth can stand in daylight.
My objection to the current religious secular debate is that for so many centuries, Christopher Hitchens is right, religion had a very closed mind. Who has the closed mind now? Who uses character assassination to portray anyone who has certain beliefs that they try to root in logic as closed-minded, unscholarly? The gist of my argument is that Christopher Hitchens, who is one of America's most talented writers, has become so fanatical in his hatred of religion that he just invents things to decry it. For example, he can make fun of the fact that I don't believe in evolution, although I never even said that. I believe in evolutionary development, as the Torah itself says. 6 days of creation, the mineral was followed by the vegetable, then the animal, then the intellectual. The question is whether this is guided. The question is whether mathematical possibilities allows for this. But before I even get to that, here's an example of just pure invention in order to make religion, Jews, the state of Israel look bad. Listen to this. He's writing about the greatest scientists of the 20th century, saying, don't be impressed that Einstein believed in God, because he didn't believe in the God that we believe in. He was a deist, and, quote, offered the first presidency of the state of Israel. Einstein declined because of his many qualms about the way Zionism was tending. That is pure, utter fabrication. First of all, Einstein was offered the second presidency. The first president was Chaim Weizmann. He was offered it in 1952. He died 3 years later. The Princeton Review says he turned it down, quote, because he had neither the desire nor the energy to run a country. He was a scientist. The New York Sun, in an essay about the subject, he politely and sensibly declined on the grounds that it would interfere with his scientific work. He loved Israel. He was one of the great Zionists of the 20th century. Anything to portray religion in a negative light. As far as the great complexity, well, you continually invent in your book. I'll get to that in a moment. You'll have to just be patient as I dissect it. My friends, most people today accept evolutionary principles without being knowledgeable of them. I actually studied them and debated some of the world's greatest evolutionary biologists, from Richard Dawkins, 4 debates, John Maynard Smith, professor of evolutionary biology, University of Sussex, he was the world's greatest living evolutionist at the time. For evolution to work, you need 2 things. You need genetic mutation and you need natural selection. Now, genetic mutation means that when DNA replicates, it introduces, through a mistake in copying itself, a new feature that is not existent in the parental type. So for that to happen, you need mutation to do 2 things. Number 1, they have to be very common because you have great complexity in the world. Number 2, they have to be beneficial. Let's see what the world's greatest scientists say about mutation. Because remember, Darwin knew nothing about mutation. Darwin believed in adaptation. And he based it on the Lamarckian theory of acquired characteristics that preceded him. Here is what H.J. Muller, the world's foremost expert on mutation, Nobel Prize winner, says, quote, mutations are of random nature. Accordingly, the vast majority, certainly well over 99%, are harmful. Nobel Prize winner Ernst Mayr. These are all evolutionists. Most of them are atheists. It is a considerable strain on one's credulity to assume that finely balanced systems, such as certain sense organs, could be improved by random mutations. Will the eye get better if it makes a mistake in its replication? In fact, the author of The Mystery of Heredity concludes, listen to this, the vast majority of mutants in any organism are so detrimental as to believe that it is impossible for them to lead to complexity. These are people who all believe in evolution. Now, Julian Huxley, from the most important of all evolutionary families, wrote the following. We should clearly have to breed, to get a horse, he says, 1,000,000 strains, 1,000 squared, to get 2 favorable mutations. Up to 1,000 to the millionth power to produce a horse. Now listen to this. 1,000 to the millionth power to produce a horse, which isn't even as complex as the human brain, becomes 1 with 3 million zeros written after it. That would take 3 volumes of 500 pages just to print. No one would bet on anything so improbable happening, and yet, ta-da, it has happened. That's how he ends the quote. Now, how could evolutionists say on the one hand, mutation is destructive? I mean, if you're born with a 3rd arm, you're not really doing that well, I assure you. Even though it seems that you've gone forward, you've gone backward. So how could this theory, and again, I'm not denying evolution. I'm saying evolution needs a guiding parent because the numbers are impossible. How could we believe that things, just a horse, 1 to the 3 millionth power, 1,500 pages to write the number, would this ever happen? So here's how a Harvard professor answers it. The important point is that since the origin of life belongs in the category of at least once phenomena, time is on its side. However impossible we regard this event, given enough time, it will almost certainly happen at least once. Time is in fact the hero of the plot. I love this part, listen carefully. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible, the possible probable, the probable virtually certain. One has to only wait because time itself performs miracles. Do you get it? I believe in a three-word entity called God. Christopher Hitchens believes in a four-word entity called time. The essence of evolutionary theory, which is undeniable, is that if you give enough time, this is all going to happen. My friends, when I was young, and I'm not a scientist, I remember, and you remember, they told us the world was 4 billion years old. Then they said it was 8 billion. Now we're up to 16. Soon it'll be 20, 30. Soon they'll give it 1 trillion years. Now why? Because the more we discover the complexity of life and the impossibility of any of this stuff evolving, the more time we need. Let me tell you something. You can give this forever. Something something that mathematically has 300 million zeros after it is never going to happen. I don't care if you have forever. That's why, as Christopher Hitchens said, it didn't happen on all the other planets. If he's right and I'm wrong, why did life happen only here? We have 16 billion years. There's natural selection there. There's genetic mutation there. Why didn't it happen there? One place? Oh, he'll tell you that we haven't yet found it. Well, we have all of these. He's seen the galaxy Andromeda. It's not there. Let me tell you, I'm not the only person who doesn't believe in evolution without guidance. And let me be clear about that. The greatest scientist, he passed away a few years ago, but I met him at Oxford, from Harvard, Stephen Jay Gould. He didn't believe in evolution. He believed in punctuated equilibrium. I saw him debate Richard Dawkins. He destroyed evolution, and he's an atheist. He said that the fossil record does not reflect evolution. Sir Fred Hoyle said that because there are trillions of mutations that would have to take place and none of those organisms would have survived because the possibility of a genetic mutation is 99.9 negative, detrimental and lethal to the organism. So Hoyle said you would have to find trillions of destroyed organisms that don't exist. In fact, it was Darwin himself who said that the greatest objection to his theory, because let's remember, The Origin of Species, published in 1863, was not a tome about the origin of life. It was a theory to explain the fossil record, but the problem was that there were missing transitional links. So what he said was, I'd like to give you the exact quote, Darwin said that the imperfection of the fossil record comes entirely to the fact that we have not yet dug sufficiently. In 1863, that would make sense. But my friends, we've now dug up the whole world. We're looking for oil. We're looking for diamonds. We've dug up everywhere. We've barely found them. So Stephen Jay Gould, as Christopher Hitchens well knows, doesn't believe in evolution, or didn't. He argued for punctuated equilibrium, great leaps, which explains the dearth of fossils. To still be an evolutionist today, you have to have faith. There is no evidence. The transitional links barely exist. That's why when Dawkins, who again, friend of mine, I debated him, when he debated Stephen Jay Gould, he had nothing to say. What evidence? Where are these trillions and trillions and trillions of transitional links? Remember, you need billions of mutations to go from a single cell amoeba.
The evolution needs guidance argument is one of religion's oldest hiding places. It takes a gap in someone's understanding and fills it with God. But science does not require every mutation to be good. Most changes can be neutral or harmful, while useful traits spread over generations through natural selection. Fossils, genetics, viruses, embryos, and comparative anatomy all point in the same direction. Life changes through natural processes. Punctuated equilibrium does not destroy evolution. It explains why change can happen in bursts instead of a perfect straight line. Calling that faith is dishonest. Faith starts with the answer. Science follows the evidence, even when the answer is uncomfortable. So here's the question. If religion has to keep attacking science to protect belief, is that confidence or fear? Comment your thoughts below, and do not forget to like and subscribe. If you like this, there is still more to this debate, so comment, "More Hitchens," and we will continue.